Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai, Pedig Dalet, Halacha Beis, and Gimel. We will be learning Daf Lamed Vav. We left off on Daf Lamed Vav, Amud Aleph, all the way on top, right, by the new Mishnah by Halacha Beis. Halacha Beis, the second Mishnah in this Pedig, will speak about another case in which an Ha'aretz is relied upon regarding Maisres, even when the produce that the Chaver is eating was not counted on to be eaten on Shabbos, was not counted on to be used on Shabbos, as we learned in the previous sugya. Speaking about a case where, let's say, Reuven, who's an Ha'aretz, is insisting, as we'll see how, with a neder of Zerizus, for Shimon to come eat by him, and Shimon and Reuven is celebrating, as the Gemara will clarify, as we already learned before regarding this Mishnah, a wedding of one of his children that got married for the first time with a Kala that got married for the first time. So there is the highest level of celebration, and it's Shabbos, Sheva Brachas, right? It's within the week of the wedding. And Mipnei Eva, not to cause animosity, here again, Chazal gave reliability to the Balabas, to the Reuven, to have the chaver over. The chaver can eat there, relying upon him that he said that he completely separated all the trumas and maises, not to create animosity. We're going to learn from the sugya a general rule, and I know there are exceptions, but there's a rule, for example, that asur lechaver sheyoichal b'seuda, that a chaver cannot eat in a meal. We're speaking about a meal from an Ha'aretz, she'ein lo shein. She'ein lo shein means that it's not a renowned meal, which means it's not a mitzvah meal. You know, there has to always be some sort of mitzvah purpose for a chaver to eat by Ha'aretz. That is something that we'll learn from this sugya. Now, we're going to have Noch Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, the next halacha, halacha Gimel. Halacha Gimel is going to be moving on to a complete new topic now. There's going to be two parts of halacha Gimel. First part we'll discuss more in the Gemara today, and the second part we'll leave for the later dafin. The first part of this Mishnah is speaking about whether the Mai is subject to Maiser Ani. We never spoke about Maiser Ani, but before we explain the Machloikes Tanoim in the Mishnah, let's use words that we never fully spoke about, and that is like this: that there are two steps when it comes to the separation of Trumais and Maisers. Step number one is called likrois shem, which means to designate, and that could be done verbally. And step number two is to physically separate. Now, just as an example, how this relates to the Mai, we keep on repeating that Maiser Rishon is something that the Chaver does not need to give to the Levi. What he needs to give to the Kohen is Trumas Maiser. But don't forget that the Trumas Maiser that the owner will give to the Kohen is coming from the Maiser Rishon. Happens to be that by Tevel, the owner gives the Maiser Rishon to a Levi, and the Levi separates from the Maiser Rishon, Maiser Min HaMaiser, Trumas Maiser, and gives that. The Levi gives it to the Kohen. Since by the Maiser Rishon does not need to be given to the Levi, so the owner, the Chaver, will be the one separating Trumas Maiser. Maiser Rishon Itaka doesn't give, because since it's a Safik, we say Hamoitz and Chavere all about Ayah. But in order for the Balabas, the Chaver, to give Trumas Maiser from the Demai to a Kohen, he has to do the first step to the Demai, which is Likroi Shem, which is to designate 10% as Maiser Rishon, from which he now physically separates the Maiser Min HaMaiser. So even though we keep on saying that Maiser Rishon is not something that the Chaver has to separate, true, he doesn't have to physically separate, but at least he has to designate. In contrast, for example, with Truma Gedoyla, since even the Am Ha'aretz knows that if you don't separate Truma Gedoyla, eating what is here, which is called Hevel, is a sin that's subject to the penalty of Misa B'dei Shomayim, even the Amoritz will designate and separate the Truma Gedoyla. So Truma Gedoyla not only does not need to be separated, it does not need even to be designated. That's the difference between Truma Gedoyla and Ma'aser Rishon. Neither of them will be given by the Chaver to the Kohen, to the Levi. Neither of them. But there is a difference. Again, by Truma Gedoyla, you don't even need to designate. And Ma'aser Rishon, which does not need to be given, which means it doesn't have to be physically separated, but it does need to be designated in order for the Chaver to give from it the Trumas Ma'aser. Now, understanding that, let's go to Ma'aser Ani that we're going to start speaking about right now. And we have a Machlokes Tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer holds that Ma'aser Ani, like Truma Gedoyla, does not even need to be designated by the Chaver. The Chachamim hold that Ma'aser Ani will be like Ma'aser Rishon, which means, yes, you have to be Kodesh. But then we say, since maybe the Amoritz gave it to the Ani, so, and there's no Kedusha in the Ma'aser Ani, so it's a financial question, for which we say, which means that the Chaver Einoi Tzarech Lahaflish, but yes, Tzarech Likrei Shem. That's going to be the first topic of the Mishnah. The second topic of the Mishnah will be a broader topic, and that will be whether one may give the designated Maasros to their recipients on Shabbos. Could you give Truma Gedoyla? We're also going to now speak not only about the Mai, we're going to speak about Truma Gedoyla. Can you give those items to the recipient on Shabbos? We're going to see what the issue is, and that will, and we're going to, again, the bulk of the sugya will not be on Daf Lamed Vav, will be in the later Dafim. But when it comes to the first machlokes in the Mishnah regarding whether you have to even be a likrei shem or not by Ma'aser Ani, the Gemara is going to bring another machlokes, and we're going to see how that's linked to our Mishnah. Machlokes Tanoim regarding if someone sees the Am Ha'aretz separating Ma'aser Sheni, doesn't mean that he's a Neman for the Maasros in general, but regarding that batch upon which the Am Ha'aretz, you saw him separating Ma'aser Sheni, Rabbi Eliezer holds Haneman L'Sheni Neman L'Rishon. The Chachamim hold Haneman L'Sheni Einoi Neman L'Rishon. And we're going to take this topic and we're going to link it to the first part of our Mishnah. That's more or less today's Daf Lamed Vav. And now, Chavra, let's go inside. We're going back to Halacha Beis. Like we mentioned, Halacha Beis is still a hemshech to our sugya of more cases in which the Am Ha'aretz is relied upon. And we're not going to use the word trusted upon, right? That's already the whole machlokes. Kvei Shabbos, Ema Shabbos, Emos. Whenever there is an Ema, there is more trustability. Sometimes it's not about trusting. And that is, and we quoted this Mishnah in the previous sugya, if a person like made a neder on someone else to, so to say, force them to eat by him. What does that mean? This is called neder and nidrei zeruzin. Nidrei zeruzin is called motivational nedarim. So Reuven is the host. Reuven, as we'll see in the Gemara, actually married off one of his children. And the chassan is the first wedding, the kala the first wedding, which means it's the highest type of simcha. Shabbos, Sheva Brachas. He so much wants for his friend Shimon to eat by him. And the way he invites him is by telling him, listen, Shimon, if you're not going to come eat by me, you're supposed to listen that everything that I own is usher upon you. Really, what we learned in Masechtas Nedarim is that since what Reuven wants to do, Reuven is trying to show Shimon that I'll be very offended if you don't come to me. In a good way, because I really, really want you to come participate in my simcha. Actually, it's not a real neder, which means that if Shimon won't come, not lavdafke, in this case, Shimon won't be usher to have a na from Reuven. Nevertheless, that was a common way. If I'm not mistaken, there are 4 types of nidrei zeruzin. Let's just remind ourselves of another type. If you have a buyer and a seller, and they're haggling over price, so the seller says, "I want 3," and the buyer says, "I'm only going to pay you 1." In that type of negotiation, if the seller says, "that if I'm going to go down from 3 to 2," he makes a neder. And the buyer says, yeah, if I'm going to pay you more than one, I'm making another neder. And then they agree upon two. They make a compromise. No one is bound by their neder. No, there's a concept called a motivational neder, just to explain what the Hamadras Chaveda is talking about. But when you have such a statement, right, that if you're not going to come eat by me, everything that I own is ushered upon you, Shimon, in that type of culture, Shimon understands Reuven really wants him to come, and Shimon will go. The problem is, Shimon is a chaver. Reuven is the Am Haaretz. Now, I just want to really repeat the end of the last sugya. The end of the last sugya from Halacha Aleph is that if Shimon would have been planning to go to the Reuven from before Shabbos, that means if he was already relying on that meal, and b'shoigeg he didn't do what he needed to do, he can always trust him on Shabbos. That was the first mission of the Perek. Here we're speaking about a case that Shimon was not relying on going to the Shabbos Sheva Brachas, and therefore Shimon made his own meal in his home. Shimon was not relying upon it. Here we don't say Kavod Shabbos / Ema Shabbos. But here there is a unique heter for the first week, because even though he was not relying on it. Nevertheless, since it has a simcha, Reuven really wants them to come, and let me already give you what the Gemara says. There's going to be animosity if Shimon doesn't go. Many times people get insulted because it's a simcha. By a simcha, people get insulted. So here, even though there was no, I relied upon it, we don't say Kavod Shabbos, we don't say Ema Shabbos, we also believe Reuven. Let's read it inside. The problem is, means Shimon does not trust Reuven, the balabas, that because Reuven is a Am Haaretz. Nevertheless, a heter oichel imay b'Shabbos rishayno. He eats with him on the first Shabbos, which is what we will call Shabbos Sheva Brachas. Afal pi she'einoi neman ala maisros, even when Reuven is not trustworthy. However, again, like we had before, if the Chachamim, because of not creating animosity, so to say, removed the my restrictions, but really the owner, the balabas, the father of the chassan or of the kala, are not trustworthy people regarding maisres, do you even have to ask him? Says the Mishnah, yes. Like we had in the previous sugya, it's because we want to create a pretext. We don't want for people stam to eat. He has to say, mamish, like we had, not because we trust him, but we don't want a chaver ever to eat. A person will observe it and say, see, he's going to him. At least you go through the formality. Did you tithe it? You really tithe it. And another detail, the way you ask it of him is derech hakalosim. You say, oh, I want to come to you, but I'm sure because of the tumult of the simcha and because of this and because of that, I know that normally you would separate the tithings. Maybe you forgot. You have to ask him in a way. And the guy has to say, no, I took off the trumas u'maisos. But all of that heter is only on the first week. However, on the second week, I want you to know, we're going to read inside the Rash Shadilio that, many people think after the Sheva Brachas, there is no simcha. It's like, no. There are certain dinei simcha by 30 days. There's not going to be Sheva Brachas. But no, it would be a reason, even though it's not the first week, they just got married. Many people are not familiar with it. We're going to learn a shita that says that when you make a mezumin, you say shahasimcha b'ma'oinoi for the whole 30 days. We don't do that. But even though you did it then, you wouldn't do Sheva Brachas. But epes hasimcha there is there. Nevertheless, even though he makes these types of midrei zeruzin, and he so implores, if you're not going to come to me, everything that I own will be yasser b'hana, doesn't work anymore. All right. And many understand that the chiddush of the sefer of the Mishnah is that even if Reuven made a neder, not on the first Shabbos, on the second Shabbos, that's stronger than nidrei zeruzin. We're not going to go into how he does it. He makes a neder that if Shimon won't come, Shimon Take won't be able to eat anything from Reuven. So Shimon wants to go. Problem is, Reuven is an Am Haaretz. It doesn't matter. We don't trust him. We learned in the beginning of this Perek that in every Shabbos you trust him. Again, you have to remember. Every Shabbos you trust him if you are relying on eating that meal before Shabbos. Now it's already Shabbos. You forgot to do what you needed to do before Shabbos. You can't be amazing. You forgot to deal with the Tumas U'Maisos. One option would be if a Am Haaretz invites me, let's say if I'm a Chaved, we're going to learn in the 7th chapter. There's a certain Tanai that I could make before Shabbos, which I should. But if B'shoigeg I forgot, that is where we take out the card of Halacha Aleph. I relied upon it. I forgot to do what I needed to do on Shabbos, every Shabbos. Shabbos Rishonim, Shabbos Shniya, every Shabbos. Here, you weren't relying upon it. So therefore, only Shabbos Rishonim.
So let's say Ruvain makes this that if you don't eat by me, how forever? So that taka is forever?
Normally, it won't be forever. And even if it would be forever, so forever there's going to be a netted. You'll have to do Ataras Nidam. No, it's after the first Shabbos, you can't rely on Amoritz. Yes.
I understand. But now Reuven says, you're not eating by me.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, we do that. In other words, the animosity, we don't always say, it's like a guy says, Shalom Bayis, you think Shalom, for Shalom Bayis, you can't always pull out the card, there'll be animosity. Okay? So there'll be animosity. Okay, says the Gemara. Rabbi Yanai Rabbi Shmuel b'Shem Rabbi Yechon. Guys, we learned this before, that the entire case of the Mishnah, where you do rely on Reuven on the Amma Aretz, is only b'Shabbos Shel Peroit Gamya. We already said Peroit Gamya is a composite of two Greek words. Peroitoi, proto, means first, and Gamya means a wedding celebration. That means because you can have wedding celebrations and not the first wedding. It's also a celebration, but halachically now, many dinim. The highest dinim of Simcha is the first wedding for both Chassan and Kala. The Shabbos Shal Peroit Gamya. There, Hitiru only because of Avam. Only because of Avam. I want to read the Rasha Ilio, the third line at the end of the third line from the top right column, just to speak about that there is some Simcha after the first Shabbos. Shabbos Shniya. Why? Because the Iker Simcha Azla Law. The main Simcha left, not all of the Simcha. That's why, that we learned in the first chapter of Ksuba is the Chol Talas and Yoimin, that for the first 30 days, that regardless why you came to a meal, if the Chassan and Kala are there, listen to this, you say, I know that we don't do that. What's even, according to the opinions that hold, that when you bench after a meal, even if the meal was not called because of they got married, people eat. You say by Mizuman Shah Simcha, that means that there is some Simcha for 30 days. Nevertheless, Zayin brachas like the Sheva brachas that you make after the mentioning, that you only do b'Shivas Yemei HaMishpah, and as we know, and also only if you have the Panim Chadashos, with the exception of Shabbos that he doesn't have to speak about. On Shabbos you don't need a Panim Chadashos. You know why? Because you're the Panim Chadashos. Why? Because it's Shabbos. Let's go back to we said Kveit Shabbos. That Shabbos there's an Aliyah. So you were by the chuppah. Panim Chadashos means someone that was not by the chuppah. If someone came to Simchas Chassan the Kala, they're still called the Panim Chadashos. They were not there when they made the Sheva Brachas under the chuppah. But on Shabbos, even the people that were there, you're not the same person. You got elevated. So Shabbos, there is a Panim Chadashos, so to say. Okay. Says the Gemara Amar Rabbi. Khan here in our Mishnah, you see, Hitiru Tavalim Mishum Darchei Shalom. In other words, it's not that we trust the Am Ha'aretz. We don't trust the Am Ha'aretz. Because of Darkei Shalom is the opposite side of the coin of Eva. Not to have Eva. Yes, to promote peace, you give credence. You give credence. So Rabbi Chanina Amar, he tells you that Rabbi Yerushalmi asked, hold on, if it's only because of Darkei Shalom, that means it's not that you believe the host. The Chachamim lowered the Gezerah. They removed the Gezerah because not to have animosity. So why does the Mishnah say explicitly that the host has to say me'osarim? And this will be not the first time. We're getting used to something. The Gemara has an answer. You know why the Gemara doesn't write down the answer? Because the Gemara already wrote out the answer before on Daf Lamed Gimel. And what is the answer the Manafulda reminds us? Not that the Gemara has no answer. Look inside the Manafulda, the third line from the top. The Gemara doesn't have to answer anything because Shemeturetz Gamkein, because it's already it's already answered. B'teirun still el when the Gemara said on the Daf Lamed Gimel, which is Al Yidei Ilah. That was the girsa that we had. What's Al Yidei Ilah? You give a pretext. That means even though really it's not needed, but even though it's not really needed, Chachamim never wanted you to think that there's no demai. So the way people understand there is an issue of the Mai, at least go through the motions. Sometimes you go through the motions, like you can almost use the words Marasai. It shouldn't look like that the whole Demai doesn't exist. Okay. Says the Gemara. Okay. On the first Shabbos, Darkei Shalom. What happens if Sha'al b'Shabbos Rishayim? Reuven, in our case, the father of the Chassid or Kal, invited Shimon on the first week, and he didn't come. And now Shimon wants to make up by coming on the second week. Maybe that's the highest level of Eva. Because sometimes people understand, I couldn't make it, but make it up. Perhaps, you understand, perhaps the coming on the second week is like coming on the first week. That's the Shiloh that the Gemara has, and the Gemara doesn't answer. That's a good question. Now, Amar Rav Chizda. The Mishnah never said the words wedding feast. The Mishnah never said those words. How did we get to a wedding feast? No, Rabbi Yochanan said that. Look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you eat on the first Shabbos and on the second Shabbos. How, like, we get it that the Rebbe doesn't always write things explicitly, but such a jump. So the Gemara says the fact that Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not write in the Mishnah that we're speaking about a Su'udas mitzvah, because he didn't have to. You know why? Because Bechlal, if it's not a Su'udas mitzvah, a Chaber shouldn't be going there anyways. Amar Rab Chizda, Kan Shaninu. From this, that our Mishnah is speaking about such a limited case. Mamish, not stam. It's the Shabbos Rishayna of a wedding of the first time. The Mishnah doesn't make boo. The Mishnah doesn't even say it's a Su'udas mitzvah. Why was the Mishnah so obscured? Because it's self-understood that it has to at least be a Su'udas mitzvah. So from here we see Sha'asur l'chaver she'yochel b'su'uda she'ein loy shein. She'ein loy shein means that it's not a Su'udas mitzvah. That's Gavaldi.
But they're talking about Sudas on Shabbos, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Sudas on Shabbos, the Shoyeg, you could still go. If for some reason.
So what Valad wants to really point out is that in the previous Mishnah, when we're not speaking about, you can argue that every time you go to someone's house, there's some mitzvah involved. There's a certain, it doesn't contradict what we're saying right now. What we're saying right now is that for a chaver to go to the house of Amoritz, there has to be some purpose. So the fact that there has to be some purpose, it doesn't bother me that the Rebbe did not write what was the purpose. I already know there has to be some purpose. If there wouldn't even have to be a purpose, Rebbe would not have been so silent about what we're talking about. It gives the Amoraim more right to say, I know what the Mishnah is talking about. Speak about the Shabbos after the first wedding of a kid. So why didn't Rebbe write anything? Because some of it we already know. There has to be something beyond stuff. Okay, let's move on. As we spoke on in the introduction, Halachi Gimel, which is now we're still on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, the third Mishnah of the Spedic, is going to speak about two dinim and completely moving on. What are we moving on to? We're moving on to Meiser Ani. And let's go quickly repeat, Vlad, when it comes to Meiser Sheni, when it comes to the Mai has to have removed from it Trumas Meiser and Meiser Sheni. What about Meiser Rishon? Meiser Rishon, you don't have to separate, but by Meiser Rishon, you have to designate verbally. You have to say that in the top right of the basket, I'm separating from there. I'm designating from there Meiser Rishon. Why? Not because you're going to give it to the Levi. You won't. But for you, the owner, the chaver, to remove Trumas Meiser is 10% from the Meiser Rishon. So you at least have to designate it. You don't separate it because I'm all over that. Truma Gedoyla, you don't even have to designate, because we say that the owner, the Amoritz, took it and gave it to the Kohen. What about Meiser Ani? For sure, I know Meiser Ani has no Kedusha. Same logic. You won't, you don't give, you don't separate Meiser Ani from the Mai to give it to the Ani. My question is, do you have to at least verbally designate it? Do you have to verbally designate? Maybe if you don't designate it, everything else is tevel. That's a machlokes tanoi. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Oimer. that not even likroi shem, ein adam tzarech likroi shem al meiser ani shel demai. In other words, we view meiser ani like truma gedoyla. Ad kedei kach. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. Ein adam tzarech likroi shem al meiser ani shel demai. The Gemara will explain that Rabbi Eliezer Savar, the last hour line on the left, right. Tevel shal meiser ani, that if a person doesn't even designate meiser ani, that produce is also under the penalty of misa. So it's mamash like Tumah Gedolah. Hilkach, the first line under the Gemara, lo nechshatu am aretz al meiser ani, and therefore, umafrishin oisen veloichin la'atzman. That means that you don't have to give it to him because we are certain that the owner, the Amaretz, actually gave it. However, B'chachamim Sabri, I know we didn't read the Mishnah yet, but let's continue in the Pnei Moshe, the first line on the Gemara. The nechshatu amay aretz, the shaloi lahapish meiser ani. We do have a suspicion. It's not for sure. Most do, some don't. Why not? Because even though it's misa b'dei shamayim, lefi she'eni ela b'lav. That's, he holds it's a lesser of a violation. Ulefika chalekeach mehen, when you buy the mai from an amaretz, no one holds you have to be mafresh, which means physically separate. But the Chachamim hold you have to at least designate. Let's remember this. Designation, separation. Designation is called koyd hashem. Koyd hashem l'maiser ani. Avaleinu tzarech lahafresh v'litin la'ani, because it's a suffix. Let's read now one side. Even though everyone agrees, or to say it in these words, guys, the machlokes is Rabbi Eliezer holds Meiser Ani is like Truma Gedolah, and the Chachamim hold that Meiser Ani is like Meiser Rishon. And regardless, if Meiser Sheni has kedusha, Meiser Sheni, you do have to separate actually and take it to Yerushalmi or to make the redemption, etc. But Meiser Ani, like Meiser Rishon, has no kedusha, and therefore we get to say no one holds you have to be mafresh, machlokes whether you have to be kodesh. This will be the topic that we're going to come back to today in the Gemara. But now let's keep going on in the Mishnah. The Mishnah has a second topic, and this is a huge topic. Can you give maasros to their designated recipients on Shabbos? That's the question. Says the Mishnah. And guys, as we'll see in a moment, this question isn't only related to the Mai. It's also related to Tevel. Mi shekara shein l'trumas maasros shel demai, which is what you have to do. Which means you already made a designation, but you didn't actually separate and give it. Or let's speak about, we just said that Meiser Ani shel vadai, not shel demai. Meiser Ani shel vadai is also something that, you have to give Meiser Ani. But you didn't actually give it. You only designated it and you still own it. So the question is, all of that was done before Shabbos. Of course, you can't do it on Shabbos because you can't be, that's an Isur Tikkun Mana. Says our Mishnah, the words of the Mishnah is, Lo yitleim b'Shabbos. Lo yitleim literally means, don't take them. But you know what it really means? Don't take them to give them. The issue is giving it. We'll see all this tomorrow. Lo yitleim b'Shabbos, don't actually give it. The Gemara actually says that even though the words are lo yitleim means don't even take them, means don't even separate them. You're going to see that you are allowed to separate the gifts. You are allowed to physically separate it. What you may not do is you may not give already designated gifts to their respective recipients, and we'll see the reason in the Gemara. Okay? Now, what did the Mishnah use as an example for the second topic? The Mishnah gave two examples, right? Which is either Trumas Meiser of the Mai, which normally you have to actually give to the Kohen, or Meiser Ani Shel Vadai. Why didn't the Mishnah give Truma Gedolah? Because the same thing will be with, can you give Truma Gedolah to the Kohen? That's what the Mishnah is saying you can. So why did the Mishnah have to give examples? The Mishnah says Truma so Meises. So the Rash is very important. We have time. I know we're still on Amud Aleph, but look inside the last line in the Rash on the right column, and it's going to go into the left column. Says that Asherilia, guys, we're moving to the top of the left. Why didn't we speak about Trumas Meiser of Vadai? Because the Yisrael Askinon, we're speaking about a Jew who owns the produce. By Vadai, what does the Yisrael do? I give Truma Gedolah to the Kohen. I don't give Trumas Meiser. I don't give it. By Vadai, I give Meiser Rishon to the Levi. The Levi is the one that gives from the Meiser. The Torah says that in Koirach. The Levi gives 10% of the 10%. Right. So since the Mishnah is speaking about the owner as a Yisrael, the Mishnah is not going to speak about giving Trumas Meiser of Vadai, because you, the non-Levi, non-Kohen owner, you don't give the Trumas Meiser. Because for you have to give Meiser Rishon Levi, right? Second line of the top of the left. Not only that, he writes in the brackets for Yisrael, and if Yisrael decides, I'm going to give the Trumas Meiser of Vadai, you don't have the right to do it. You're taking that away from the Levi. However, Avo B'Damai, in contrast, which is the first example of our Mishnah, Meiseres of Shaloi, we already says that by Demai, you don't give anything to the Levi, because we say the Hamaitz Mechaveri Olamanaya. Elama, Elo, Shatrumas Meiser, yes, Mafresh Reis and Lakayim, the time of sacrifice. Right. So that's first of all why the Mishnah's first example was Trumas Meiser Shal Demai. Now, what's the next case? The next case of the Mishnah was Vadai. What example did the Mishnah give? Meiser Oni Shal Vadai. Avo, but Meiser Oni Naka Shal Vadai, Ilu Shal Demai, Havu Shalot. Meiser Oni, you don't have to give. Even like Chachamim, you don't have to give. Now, have a kasha. It says that I should earlier. Why didn't you speak about Truma Gedolah? For how do you talk about Truma Gedolah? Vadai, Yishum, the Lab, Urcha, the Milsa, Lahash, Bois, Atruma, Malahafrisha, the Legir, Lahafrisha, Alte. Because Truma Gedolah, everyone understands the severity of not separating Truma Gedolah, that when a Yid buys, they buy it in the granary. When they buy produce, the first thing they do is they take 2%, they give it to the Kohen. That's why we're saying, even the Ama'aret separates the Truma Gedolah. So in other words, the Mishnah is saying that really the question is on Truma Gedolah. The Mishnah doesn't use it as an example because most people, mamish, most people will never end up having Truma Gedolah in their possession on Shabbos. They're so machmir not to have any to do with Truma Gedolah. They give to the Kohen, they buy, they give it right away. Why would you even have it in your house that you have to worry about? Can you give it on Shabbos? So these are the two practical examples. Let's leave the Mishnah. So this is the second topic of the Mishnah, like we mentioned. Now, there's one exception where you could give it on Shabbos. If a certain kohen or a certain ani is accustomed to eat on your table on Shabbos, can you serve to your guest who's a kohen truma? You're giving it, but you're not giving it. You're not going and giving it. You're having him as a guest. So you could do that, but. And there's a very big button, which is like this. When I have a guest around my table on Shabbos, they feel to a certain degree beholden to the balabas, that he was generous. If the balabas is giving them truma, if the guest is a kohen, which is something that he's chayiv to give to them, or if a balabas invites an ani and he's giving the meiser ani, he has to always notify them, Shabbos or the weekday, I want you to know, you're not beholden to me. I'm not doing you a big favor. I'm giving you something that anyways is yours. That you always have to do. Then, 1 second. They can eat it. You have to inform them so they should not feel beholden to the balabas. In other words, we're going to see one cannot use trumas or meiseres, which they have to give for their personal use. If I have a guest on Shabbos and they're going to be so grateful that I was the groiser, benevolent balabas, I can't do that if what I'm giving them, I'm chayiv to give to them anyway. But that's a side thing. The point is that I'm not allowed to give the matanos of Trumas and Meises. I can't give it to the recipients on Shabbos, with the exception that if they are eating around my table, I can serve it to them, and now I just should let them know I'm giving you Truma.
Will that make somebody uncomfortable?
I think it will make a person very comfortable. I think if to be a good host, the more we can make the guest not feel like a guest, the more we can make you're not beholden to me, you're my brother. One of the reasons why Levoya is so powerful, we had that in Soita, not only because it affords protection. That's what the Gemara says. Even though I'm only working for Amas Baruchnis, if I walk out a guest, they're protected until when they get to the destination somehow. And it's so easy for me giving that protection, and it's so different, so wrong for me not to do it. Aside of that, in my house, you're the guest, I'm the balabas. On the street, we're both equal. I think part of Achnasa Sarcham is to make the guest feel that I'm not doing you the big favor. I'm grateful you came to me. You're doing me the favor. You don't have to overdo that, but I think the equality is a good way of being Machnas Soidach. That he's making the guest feel like $1 million. This is yours anyway, but this is your food. You're eating your food. Don't even think. And he should not even think it. And on that level. Okay. Says the Gemara. Guys, we're going to leave the second part of the Mishnah for later. And now, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis, right, the second line, we're going back to the first part of the Mishnah. Machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, whether you even have to designate Ma'aser Ani of the Mai. It's a new topic. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Boa Bar Huna, in the name of Rav. Listen to this. Ha'oichel peiroisav tevulim le'Ma'aser Ani. If a person, forget about the Mai, you buy produce, you're a farmer, you grew produce, you separated everything other than Ma'aser Ani. Ma'aser Ani is only 2 years of the 7-year cycle. On the 3rd year and on the 6th year. If a person did everything other than Ma'aser Ani, you should know that they're Chayiv Misa, they're Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. Okay. And all of that is explaining the Shita of who? Of Rabbi Eliezer. That's why Rabbi Eliezer holds that you don't even have to be Kodesh. You don't even have to designate it. Because just like everyone was trustworthy regarding Truma Gedoyla, why? Because they don't want to be Chayiv Misa B'dei Shamayim. Everyone was trustworthy regarding Ma'aser Ani. Says the Gemara, my time of the Rabbi Eliezer, and now we understand the rationale behind Rabbi Eliezer. You don't even have to designate Ma'aser Ani. Since anyone, even the Ha'aretz knows that, oh my God, if I'm not going to separate the Ma'aser Ani, it's like not separating Truma Gedoyla. So therefore, mafresh, he will be mafresh. So what's the reason of the Chachamim? My time in the Rabbanan, because they argue beloy kach. They have a very interesting argument. It's not that the Chachamim hold that against what Rav is saying, that there's no Misa B'dei Shamayim. We're not saying that. Everyone agrees that if it's Tevel, only L'Ma'aser Ani, Chai Misa B'dei Shamayim. But, by the way, Tevel L'Ma'aser Sheni is not Chai Misa B'dei Shamayim. That's why when you buy the Mai, you have to separate Ma'aser Sheni. Because the owner knew, right, it's no Misa B'dei Shamayim. No Trumas Ma'aser, yes, Misa B'dei Shamayim, but the Ha'aretz doesn't know that. The Ha'aretz thinks that since I didn't even separate my sedition, so there's no Misa B'dei Shamayim. That's his mistake. Now, let's go back over here. Why did the Chachamim hold that you have to at least designate? Because it's a very interesting logic. Whenever there are people that do nothing, there are Amaratzim that don't even separate Ma'aser Ani, very small minority. Normally, you don't legislate rabbinic laws because of such a small minority. But if the law that you're legislating is so easy to keep, there is no laws, then we'll make you do it anyways. We're saying that the chaver who buys the demai doesn't have to give the Ma'aser Ani. So what's the machlekes? Do you have to say that the top right corner of the basket is designated for? The Chachamim say, what's costed to say those words? In other words, whenever the rabbinic law, if there'll be a rabbinic law, is something which is so easy to keep, it covers even the very few people that don't even designate, so designated. That's the logic of the Chacham.
If you designate, are you not obligated to give it then?
No, because since the possibility, even if it would be a 50-50 doubt, it's less than that, is that the original owner gave it, no one holds you have to give it. Like my sedition, no one holds you have to give it. By my sedition, you have to designate it. Because we're saying that the Ha'aretz didn't even want to designate it. What did the Ha'aretz think? The Ha'aretz thought to himself, if I designate my sedition, then I'm creating a problem with Trumas Ma'aser. Don't even designate it, and I'm Shalom Al Yisrael. From his ignorance, he thinks he's okay. So there's a chashash, there's a substantial minority of people that won't even designate my sedition. That's why you buy your chaver, you have to designate my sedition. Ma'aser Ani, more people designate and give. But still there are some people that don't do that. So the Chachamim old bus, it's so easy to do it, you're just designating. That's the way the Gemara explains. Now let's go. Tani v'learned in a brayso. We have another couple of minutes, which is good. What happens if you see you're a chaver and you are watching a Am Ha'aretz, and Ro'u Oisoi Mafreshem, you see him designating Ma'aser Shem. Actually, Mafresh means not designating, actually separating. Now, guys, we are not saying that if we watch someone separating Ma'aser Sheni, they become a Nemon. We already learned before, to become a Nemon, you have to make a Kabbalah in public in front of 3 people. We're speaking about this batch. If I, the Chaver, noticed that the Am Ha'aretz bought something or farmed it, and I saw him separating from this Ma'aser Sheni, does that mean that since he separated Ma'aser Sheni from this, he separated other things as well? Machlokes Tanoim. So like this, Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you saw him taking Ma'aser Sheni, we say Haneman l'Sheni Neman l'Rish. Even though you did not see him taking away the Rishon, you don't even have to ask him. Why? We'll see in a moment. Chachamim say no. Now let me ask you a question. What do you think is a greater loss for someone to designate? Ma'aser Sheni or Ma'aser Rishon? What's a greater loss? Ma'aser Rishon, because Ma'aser Rishon you have to give away. Ma'aser Sheni you get to keep. Yeah, they have to go to Yerushalmi, you get to keep. So the Chachamim hold on. If you see someone taking away Ma'aser Rishon on that batch, you can argue he took away Ma'aser Sheni, because if he took away something that's costing him, he for sure took, but not in the other direction. The Chachamim say no. Haneman l'Rishon, yes, Neman l'Sheni. But not the way Rabbi Eliezer says, but Haneman l'Sheni ain't a Neman l'Rishon. Now, how is that negate to our Mishnah? You'll see in a moment. But before we get there, explains the Gemara. My Talmud Rabbi Eliezer from this Brisa. You see, the kash is on Rabbi Eliezer, right? Because you understood the Chachamim. Like, just because the guy took Sheni he gets to keep. So how do you know from Sheni that he took Rishon? So there are 2 possible ways of looking at it, and the Gemara is going to rule out one of the 2. We're going to remain only with one. But now we're going to have 2. Maybe one logic is Mishum she'ein chashud lahagdim, because people don't go out of sequence. If you did the Sheni, some people, in other words, either they don't do it or they do it. When you see them doing step number 3, it's step number 3. Then, and they did step number 1. Truma Gedola, everyone takes. So they did step number 2. That's one logic. We're going to stay with that. Or maybe by Mishum Shehifrish Sheni, Chazaka Shehifrish Rishon. Either you don't do one before out of sequence, you don't go out of sequence, or look inside the Maraful 11 times from the top. We presume you did not make a distinction. It's not about you doing being magdim. Look inside the Maraful is like a middle of the Amid. Well said. So, you're not going to do the second before the first. If you saw him be mafresh sheni that kivan shefresh sheni, there's a chazaka. In other words, we don't make these distinctions. That this is selfish, this is selfless. You see a person doing something, you say, if he did it, he did it. Not always. Here, says the Gemara, this second logic is not true. You're telling me that Rabbi Eliezer makes no such distinction. Now, from our Mishnah, I know Rabbi Eliezer holds that people do make distinctions. Rabbi Eliezer, let's go back to our Mishnah. He argues with the Chachamim. He's so lenient. By Ma'aser Ani, you don't even have to make the designation. Sheni, but when it comes to Ma'aser Sheni, we're saying that when you buy Demai, you have to separate Ma'aser Sheni. By the way, separate Ma'aser Sheni. Now, guys, I know that Ma'aser Ani and Ma'aser Sheni are not in the same year. I got that. They're not in the same year. But to tell me that once you see a person separating, we can presume that everything is equal. No, it's not equal. No, it's not. Because we're saying that the Am Ha'aretz will, according to Rabbi Eliezer, will separate Ma'aser Ani, will give the Ma'aser Ani, will do everything by the Ma'aser Ani, and the same Am Ha'aretz won't do anything by Ma'aser Sheni. Amanatzim do, they don't view it all the same. They make their cheshbonis. I'm going to do. That I'm not going to do. You see that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Am Ha'aretz does make distinctions. So that's why we're going to rule it out. Let Daf Lamed Zayin just finish it up. In other words, the Am Ha'aretz chooses to separate Ma'aser Ani. The Am Ha'aretz does not separate Ma'aser Sheni. So we say that, yeah, Meiser Sheni, not Meiser Oni. So Ma Im Sheni. She'ein l'Rabbi Toivas Hanoah, l'Rabbi goes to God Almighty. In other words, when you don't have to give it away, you don't have to give it away. Ha'aretz doesn't have to give away Meiser Sheni. Nevertheless, if I buy from the Ha'aretz Tzarech Lahafresh, no, it's even though Meiser Oni, I can trust him, but I cannot trust him for Meiser Sheni. So Rishoin Sheyesh l'Rabbi Toivas Hanoah, when you have to give away the Rishoin, loy kol shchein, that you have to separate it. In other words, the Gemara just concludes that the reason why Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you find someone trustworthy from Meiser Sheni, you can trust that he did Meiser Rishoin, is because people don't change the sequence. That's the only reason. Sequence you don't change. Meiser Sheni, Meiser Oni are in different years. But Chachamim say only in the direction of if he gives Meiser Rishoin, he's for sure going to separate Meiser Sheni. Rabbi Eliezer holds that if you gave Meiser Sheni, you wouldn't give Sheni and skip Rishon. You don't go out of the sequence. But not that the Ha'aretz considers either you do it all or do it nothing. The Ha'aretz makes distinctions. We'll stop over here till we continue.